The
This
movement.
conference will now be recorded.
Thank you. So we are uh, entering a new world, and we're committed to fighting for it. The agenda for today is to welcome us all, and we're up to 51 of us. That I think is a record. And I'm going to give a very brief overview on the movement as a number of people are joining for the first time. Then we'll, including some updates on what the movement is doing in this era of COVID-19. And then we'll have a special presentation from a team from Mercy Corps and University of Washington, a announcement of a new resource that Britt Lake will share with us. Then we'll hear from the chapters around the world in the different regions, and we'll all be done by an hour and a half. So that's the program. Let me, for those of you who are joining for the first time, we're in the era of the Sustainable Development Goals. And a lot of us have been very frustrated that there were little pockets of money available to do a short-term project on food or on poverty or on health or women's rights as a silo. But that big blue circle of mobilizing communities and strengthening their civil society and local government to really ensure all these SDGs get accomplished, nobody was paying for that. Nobody was supporting it. It didn't even have a name. And the name of that process is community-led development. And as a movement, we have 5 goals. One is to guarantee voice and agency for women, youth, and marginalized groups. Ensuring that local communities have a fair share of public resources. In many of the countries where we work, it's all the money stays in the capital city. It never reaches the communities. We want good local governance. Governance is not just government. It's the local government, democratically elected, socially accountable, but also a strong civil society able to mobilize the collective voice of people to get their rights fulfilled. Hopefully that will all produce quality public services for everyone, and resilience, because resilience is a community attribute. You can only have a resilient nation or resilient households if you have resilient communities. And right now, what all of us are struggling to do is to ensure that we have COVID-19 resilient communities. The way we do this, we want CLD for everyone. That means every sub-district, every cluster of villages needs somebody devoted, effective, and skilled. And Rebecca, you'll get the slides afterwards also if you want. The mobilizers for every cluster. And if that's going to happen across an entire country, that process really has to have the blessings of the government and its partners. And that means advocacy, that our local chapters need to speak with one voice with the government to ensure that the government is addressing these needs. We're organized with regions. Pascal coordinates the West Africa region, and it is growing super rapidly. Thank you, Nigeria, for being on today. Southern region coordinated by Roland Coucha and Dr. Daisy Omogashu, who coordinates the eastern side of Africa. And then we work in partnership with an existing network in South Asia, and we have individual chapters in Mexico. So that's us globally. We have a website, and we've just given it a new, easier to remember domain name. You can still reach it as communityleddev.org, but you can also reach it as mcld.org, which gets you in faster. And the website has a special feature establishing that community leadership is key to halting COVID-19. When you click on that, you get a infographic with all of the SDGs that our communities have to tackle in order to halt uh, COVID-19. And when you click on each of those SDG icons, you actually get a whole resource page on how communities are key to addressing poverty or zero hunger or sustainable communities or peace, justice, and strong institutions. So each of these has a resource. The other the other thing is that we've recently had some very specialized resources during COVID-19. I'd like to introduce Nellie and Gunjan, who will tell you what happened last week. If you would.
Hi, thanks, John. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Loud and clear, Nellie.
Great. I'm Nellie Mecklenburg with the Institute for State Effectiveness. And last week, last Tuesday, we had a call to begin brainstorming how CLD processes may be adapted to continue through COVID-19 and measures in response to it. This is something that has come up in a number of calls, including on movement calls, including on a call where Mercy Corps presented with the World Bank a couple of weeks back. So, the core aims of CLD are to build solidarity and collective action, to address hunger and poverty, increase local decision making. And these actually are still very critical, if not more so, during this pandemic. But the processes that we use or that are relied on for this in CLD often are facilitation and social mobilization and community meetings and trainings. Those are precisely the kinds of processes that are constrained by social distancing policies and by lockdowns in different countries. So this call was a first opportunity of hopefully multiple for the network and partners to begin to brainstorm some of the solutions and adaptations that could allow this to continue. And there was really great turnout, some 98 participants. The internet connection was there for us, which is also great. And we brainstormed in 4 different breakout groups, different barriers to practice around limited access, around travel, the inability to convene because you have to maintain 6 feet of distance, service delivery and procurement issues, and how people's time and priorities are shifting with caretaking duties or with livelihood issues or being sick. We have shared minutes and recordings of the call, as well as open Excel documents where the 4 breakout groups had begun to gather ideas and feedback, and we've shared that so that we can keep that work happening in the interim. Next, we'll also be sharing a small reflections paper and surveying how the movement and partners and participants want to take this forward, which could be some of the ideas that have come up are a follow-up call or focused working groups. So we will see. We'll send that out soon and hope to see many of you in the future iterations of this. Gunjan, anything to add?
No, thanks. Thanks, Nellie. That was very comprehensive. Like Nellie said, stay tuned. We will be sending out the next steps soon. In the meantime, the only other thing I want to mention is this thing that you see on the screen called Share Innovations. So when you go to the new MCLD web page, especially the one that, the main page which has COVID-19 on it, you will see this link there. We recognize and realize how much innovations are happening in our communities and within our organizations with the work that we've been doing around COVID-19. And these really are a testament to what happens when you put communities front and center in development. So we do want to collect this database, not just for learning from each other, because there's so much that, what's happening in Benin, people in Nigeria can learn from, what's happening in Nigeria, people in, maybe Liberia can learn from. So many things. Yes, we have specific contexts, but there's so many solutions that are common or that we can at least adapt to our own context. So we do want to have this as a learning resource for all of us, but also increasingly a large number of people have been coming and asking us, do you know organizations who are doing this? Do you know organizations who are working in this country and have seen something happen in terms of community mobilization? So that is a wonderful platform for you to actually showcase the great work and ideas that are happening within your communities. So many people have already put in responses, but for the others, I would really encourage you to share your innovations. It's a very simple Google form. It takes 5 minutes. So, but that's about April 21. Moving on to today.
Just go and press this. We want to stay here.
Somebody's talking in the background. I'll see if I can catch them and mute them.
All right, perfect. Thank you, John. But we have a great agenda lined up for today. So moving forward, I do want to introduce Ryan Sheely, Gian Kim, and Carly Smith from Mercy Corps, who will be sharing with us a toolkit that's been developed on measuring social capital and social cohesion. Ryan is the Director of Research and Conflict and Governance at Mercy Corps. He is also a research fellow at my alma mater, the Harvard Kennedy School. Gian is the Senior Resilience Researcher at Mercy Corps and a Visiting Fellow at the Feinstein International Center at Tufts University. And Carly Smith is a graduate student at the University of Washington Evans School of Public Policy and Governance. So from conversations among partners, we do know that this is something we struggle to measure. But the reason I'm really excited about this presentation today, as many of you who have heard me or know me know, is because some ways it ties back to meta-synthesis. And that is because the impact group in the meta-synthesis, and I know we have people from the impact group here, so I'm sure you'll be as excited as I am about this. The impact group had identified 5 impacts that we believe community-led development has in the short, medium, and long term. And one of them was social capital, right? The next step really for the metasynthesis group had been to look at each of these 5 impacts that we had identified and to come up with indicators of or ways of measuring them. And these are not easy, especially social capital. So I was super excited when we learned that Mercy Corps is actually doing all this work. And this is going to really directly feed into the metasynthesis research. So thank you for doing all of this for us. I want to mention one more connection really, and that is Susan Wong. So this research that Ria and Gian will be presenting today was commissioned by Susan Wong, who heads the community-driven division of the World Bank. And guess where the idea of the metasynthesis came from, or who germinated the idea at least? Susan Wong. So it seems that all roads kind of seem to lead to Susan here. But I would turn it over to Ryan. I think you started, and thank you.
Yep. Great. Thank you so much for that introduction, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining in. As Gunjan mentioned, the aim of today's talk is to present an overview of this social capital and social cohesion measurement toolkit with really a focus on how to use it in practice. And we're really excited to be sharing this work with you and are eager to discuss ways to use it in your own attempts to learn from and advocate for your community-led development projects. So I'll start off by just providing a little bit more background on the origins of the project and how Mercy Corps and the World Bank were aligned in this goal and mission. Carly will then present the process and methods that we used while developing it and our working definitions of social capital and social cohesion that form the backbone of the work. Gian will then walk us through the toolkit and the core survey questions. And then I'll finish up the presentation by sharing some concrete examples of what the questions look like when adapted to a given context. And we'll conclude by touching on some next steps, including validation of the toolkit and adapting it to some of the post-COVID-19 realities that John and Nellie talked about early on. So as Gunjan said, this project originated about a year ago in some parallel conversations about measuring social capital and social cohesion that were happening at the World Bank's CDD group and at Mercy Corps around the same time. So when we first spoke with Susan, Wong about this, what she was working through in her CDD portfolio was a set of challenges with measuring these two concepts, particularly in fragile and conflict-affected settings. So the first challenge was the fact that there were too many competing definitions, questions, and indices to easily sort through when designing a questionnaire or evaluation. The second challenge was that many existing questions or tools for measuring social capital and social cohesion were extremely long or complicated to use in practice. So the reason that Gian, Carly, and I were eager to take on this challenge of sorting through these many questionnaires and definitions is that this task really closely intersected with several ongoing streams of research and programming at Mercy Corps. So Gian and I have both been leading research on related topics. Gian has done work on social connections and resilience, and I've done a lot of research on community mobilization and collective action. And so these two intersecting themes in our own research build on a broader programming base at Mercy Corps that seeks to build social capital and social cohesion across a variety of types of activities, including food security, governance, and peace building. I'll now turn it over to Carly, who will present an overview of the key methods that we use to develop the toolkit and the definitions that are at the heart of this tool.
Great, thanks. Just want to confirm that everyone can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect, thanks. So as Ryan mentioned, I'm going to start by mapping out a brief overview of how we approach this project, including the key methods and criteria that we applied at each step. So we started by casting a broad net on the literature search using 25 targeted keyword searches for social capital and social cohesion, with an emphasis on CLD, migration, and fragile and conflict-affected settings. We supplemented this search with snowball sampling from citations, as well as recommendations from other experts and colleagues. And then throughout our search, we included both published peer review articles as well as gray literature from organizations. In step 2, we narrowed this list by focusing on studies and tools that explicitly attempted to measure social capital or social cohesion, which gave us a list of about 68 sources. We reviewed each of these sources in depth, mapping out the specific dimensions that each of them measured, which resulted in a total of 23 dimensions. So this mapping exercise really confirmed one of our initial intuitions, which is that attempts to measure social capital and social cohesion are highly fragmented. Our next step was to examine the measurement literature alongside the theoretical literature for the development of the conceptual framework. This led us to come up with a set of working definitions, which I'll present next. And it also allowed us to reduce the 23 dimensions that surfaced in the literature down to 8 core dimensions of social capital and social cohesion. So as we developed the working definitions of these core concepts and their dimensions, we compiled the individual survey questions in the studies that we had identified. This gave us a very long list of over 2,600 survey questions. So there's no shortage of measures, but the key was to identify those of highest relevance and quality for this purpose. In step 5, we reduced this very long list by removing duplicates, questions that weren't relevant to the context, and those which didn't fit within the practical constraints that the World Bank had laid out, which Ryan just mentioned. This gave us a somewhat reduced list of 406 questions. And then in the last step, we evaluated each question on that reduced list according to 3 criteria. First, the degree of match with the definition and use case. Second, the relevance to the context. And then finally, the quality of the question. We use this grading system as the basis for identifying the 15 questions that were ultimately included in the toolkit. We then refined the wording of the questions and answers, flagged the parts of questions that needed to be adapted to individual contexts, and wrote up the qualitative methods guide to use for adapting questions. And finally, we packaged everything up into the final toolkit that was shared with you all. So as I mentioned, developing working definitions of social capital and social cohesion was a key step that we used to move from the literature search to the list of survey questions that we included in the toolkit. These definitions may also be of interest to you all as they tie into the meta-synthesis, which John mentioned in the opening remarks. As a result, I'm just going to spend a few minutes walking through the core definitions before handing it off to Gian to walk you through the toolkit itself. For social capital, the working definition that we developed is the quantity and quality of resources, trust, and norms inhering in individuals' relationships. This was drawn from a definition by Woolcock while also being consistent with what we saw in our mapping of the empirical literature. The 4 most common dimensions of social capital measured were relationships, resources, trust, and collective action norms. As we defined each of these dimensions, we followed the same process of moving iteratively between the theoretical and the empirical literature. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go through these dimension definitions one by one, but Gian will discuss these further when going over the survey questions. The one dimension of social capital that I do want to quickly highlight is relationships, as it's very core to this work, which we define as the nature and strength of an individual's network connections with other individuals. This can be within homogeneous groups, bonding, across groups, bridging, or with individuals in positions of authority or influence, linking. While it's possible to think about aggregate levels of social capital, it's typical to develop measures of the resources, trusts, and norms for each of these three types of relationships. So any of these types of social capital can be analyzed either at the individual level. So for example, looking at the impact of a CLD program on an individual's social capital, or the community level, such as the impact of a program on average levels of social capital in a community where a CLD intervention is being implemented. For social cohesion, the working definition that we developed is a sense of shared purpose and trust among members of a given group or locality, and the willingness of those group members to engage and cooperate with each other to survive and prosper. This definition was based on a number of common definitions in the theoretical literature, including Stanley as well as Chen, and also, again, what was most commonly measured in the empirical literature. Our definitions help to clarify several important distinctions between social cohesion and social capital. So first, the definition of social cohesion highlights a group or locality, whereas the definition of social capital drew attention to individuals and their networks. This indicates that while the dimensions of social cohesion can be measured through individual level surveys, calculating measures of social cohesion requires using a local area, such as a village, as the level of analysis. Second, while trusts and norms are central to both, the group level aspect of social cohesion brings a greater focus to a number of factors that don't surface in studies of social capital, including the other dimensions we see here, a sense of belonging and identity, attitudes and behaviors towards outgroups, and the willingness of individuals to contribute to the good of a local area, civic engagement. As before, I won't walk through the definitions for each of these dimensions one by one, but we'll see them in the survey questions that Gian will present next. I'll now pass it over to Gian, who will provide an overview of the toolkit structure and walk through the questions that we selected to measure each of these dimensions of social capital and social cohesion.
Thanks, Carly. I'm also going to do a sound check and people give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Okay, cool. Great. So the resulting toolkit is then a living document composed of two data collection components. The first is the set of 15 survey questions that measure the 8 dimensions of social capital and social cohesion, drawn from a review that both Ryan and Carly have talked about, which is intended to be integrated into a larger evaluation survey. The second is a qualitative contextualization guide used to adapt the survey module to the evaluation context as well as the CLD project. And as it's been emphasized by my co-presenters, an explicit goal of this toolkit was its user-friendliness. We wanted to ensure that evaluators and researchers could pick this toolkit up and adapt it for use in their CLD programs with relative ease. So in this toolkit, we provide a step-by-step guide for how best to use it. So the first step is to review the definition and dimensions of the social capital and social cohesion, as Carly has done for us, and to review the survey module question by question to familiarize yourself with the overall structure and the purpose of each question. The second and third step brings together the preparation for and the conducting of a qualitative exercise to contextualize the survey module. As we will emphasize throughout this presentation, the performance of these questions will really depend on how well they're adapted to not only the context, but the CLD project under evaluation. Depending on the resource and constraints you're facing, you may choose to pursue a more in-depth approach or a lighter touch exercise. During pre-COVID times, we would have advocated for a brief field visit that entails interviews and focus groups with groups where CLD sub-project will have been implemented. However, for teams facing resource constraints or time constraints, or when in-person data collection may be unsafe, as it is right now, a lighter touch alternative is to conduct key informant interviews or discussions with those who have the insights and experiences and can speak to the issues at hand remotely. To facilitate this contextualization process, we also include a qualitative interview and discussion guide in the toolkit, and Ryan will discuss briefly how to adapt the toolkit in the current pandemic in our closing. The fourth step is to review the qualitative results and to adapt the survey questions. The toolkit includes instructions and a template for adapting survey questions to the context while ensuring that the intended purpose of each question is honored, even if it's translated into a different language. The fifth step is to conduct an enumerator training by integrating the descriptions of the definitions and the survey questions, as well as the qualitative findings, to help selected enumerators understand the purpose of each survey question and their contextualization. Once the enumerators are trained and the modules are appropriately folded into the folds in survey instrument, data can be collected. The toolkit, as Ryan has mentioned, was designed to produce a module survey for measuring social capital and social cohesion. It does not specify several aspects of analysis, including the construction of an aggregate indices or the comparison of results across contexts. The toolkit is intended to be a living document, as noted, and our hope is to update the toolkit on an ongoing basis, drawing on results from empirical testing and validations. To that end, the sixth and final step that's listed on this slide here is for evaluation teams to consider analysis, validation, and index construction, and to determine how best the 15 questions are aggregated into an index or analyzed on a question-by-question manner, and if and how these questions or index can be compared across evaluation contexts. Ryan will speak to these issues really briefly in our closing. With that background in mind, I will now provide a quick overview of our select questions from the survey module to give you a snapshot of what these questions look like. As you'll see in the toolkit, for each question, we cite the original source and its intended measurement purpose. If you're following along in the toolkit that was shared in the invitation, we're now on table 4. The first dimension listed in our module is relationships. As Carly highlighted earlier, the relationships is a key dimension for social capital, which uses a list of respondents' connections with other individuals, groups, organizations, and institutions, or their bonding, bridging, and linking relationships that are relevant for the CLD project and context. You may have noticed the square brackets in some of the survey questions and underlined text in others. These indicate components of the surveys which will have to be contextualized and adapted to the context in the project. Resources is the next dimension of social capital. The module includes 2 questions for the dimensions to measure both the material and non-material received and provided by individuals and households in times of need. You'll see both of these questions use the same relationship list that were developed for the relationships question. The next 4 questions focus on the dimensions of trust and collective action norms, which measure both concepts of social capital and social cohesion. Question 4 and 5 here, the first 2 on the slide, seek to measure interpersonal and generalized trust. Question 4 is measuring the interpersonal or the bonding bridging as well as the institutional trust, and inquires about an individual's belief that their connections, same as those used in previous questions in the CLD geographic unit, such as a village, will have the capacity to do respondent harm but will not do so. Question 5 inquires about an individual's belief that other people in the village who have the capacity to do respondent harm will not do so, and this is distinct from the previous question as it inquires of interpersonal trust of specific individuals or groups that are relevant for the context and the CLD program. The next 2 questions measure internalized and collectively shared aspects of collective action norms, respectively. And for sake of time, I won't dig into them too much here. On the next slide, the questions listed here are through questions 8 and through 15 and are intended to measure the concept of social cohesion. The first 2 are measuring the dimensions of belonging, or the degree to which an individual or collective group feel like they fit in the village. The first question focuses on individuals' belonging and is framed intentionally in dissent to be more explicit about capturing individual sense of exclusion or marginalization. The next one inquires about the degree to which all people within a CLD geographic unit, such as a village, fit together. The next, we include 2 survey questions that measure the dimension of identity. The first under this dimension seeks to measure the characteristics that an individual believes define them, such as a resident of their village, as a member of their social group. Here we see brackets again, and then Ryan will expound on this as we contextualize it for the context later on. The final question on this slide seeks to measure the degree to which those in the CLD geographic unit believe that their collective identity is shared. Finally, we have dimensions that measure attitude towards outgroups and civic engagement, which constitute the last 4 questions in our survey module. The first question seeks to measure how an individual perceives others with different values, lifestyles, and identities. And the series of questions inquire about an individual's acceptance of these groups of relevance for the CLD project and the context. Under the dimension of civic engagement, the module includes 3 questions which are listed here that get at related but slightly different aspects of dimension. The first is looking at the degree to which an individual believes they can participate in their village to improve the conditions for others and or shape its future. The second is looking at the degree to which an individual participates in their village to improve the conditions for others or shape its future. And the last in the series is looking at the extent of collective participation in order to improve the condition for others in that individual's group or in the village as a whole. And the sources for these questions are listed on the side there. With that overview in mind, I'm going to now turn it back over to Ryan to show how these 2 survey questions can be contextualized using examples from his work in Northeast Kenya.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So far, Gian walked through the survey questions in their generic form, right, with all of the brackets and italics in there. But as iterated through in the toolkit, and as Gian mentioned, these questions are not intended to be used as is, but should be adapted for the context where they will be used. So to guide evaluators and users' efforts to contextualize the survey questions while also honoring the intended purpose, the toolkit suggests either a light touch or more in-depth qualitative contextualization approach. And so what this approach provides is a qualitative interview and discussion guide that will help you adapt the survey questions through site visits or through discussions with colleagues and experts. And this qualitative contextualization also provides an opportunity for evaluators, researchers, and program teams to gain broader lessons that can influence planning for the evaluation of the broader CLD approach or intervention. So given the limited time we have together today, I want to present 2 examples of how questions from the toolkit can be adapted to a given context and program. So for the first example, we'll use the first question of the survey module, which measures the relationships dimension of social capital. So as it's flagged in the question itself and in the square brackets, these relationships need to be identified qualitatively. So to do so, we need to first identify the social divisions and groups that are relevant for the CLD implementation context. So here, these examples are based on some of my previous research and NGO work in Laikipia County, Kenya. So in order to generate a relationship list, we need to identify the main social divisions and groups within the community through qualitative approaches. So in Laikipia, tribe and age sets were identified as relevant social groupings. And these groups will be used to frame the bonding and bridging relationships in the relationships list. Next, it's necessary to identify the decision makers or other individuals of authority or influence. These will be used to fill in the linking relationships in the relationship list. In Laikipia, what was identified through qualitative research were chiefs, members of the county assembly, the chair people of several local NGOs, and large landowners. So in creating the relationship list, the first survey question would then look like this in practice. So you find that as you go through the toolkit, for such areas for contextualization apply across multiple survey questions. So this specific relationship list that I walked through in this example can be used to varying degrees in 7 of the 15 questions in the module. Next, I want to show an example of a different survey question, one that measures the identity dimension of social cohesion. So here again, you'll see these familiar square brackets that require contextualization. For the geographic unit piece, evaluators will have to find the local word for the unit at which the CLD instance is being implemented, right? So this could be a village or a village block. This could be neighborhood, BOMA, as is used in South Sudan, district coordination committees, as used in Nepal, or in the case of where I was working in Laikipia, this was the town center. So then the social group piece has already taken care of when we constructed the relationship list, right? This is tribe and age set. So taking together, the contextualization and adaptation of the survey question will yield the following series of questions for the identity dimension. Within the toolkit, we have carefully outlined the 6 survey components that will need to be contextualized, their affiliated survey questions, and detailed instructions for adapting survey questions. And as the performance of these 15 questions will largely depend on how well they're adapted to the context, we think this formative step is a really important and fruitful part of the overall measurement effort. And then in our final few minutes, I will discuss some of these next steps that Gian alluded to at the beginning, and try to share some initial insights on field use, especially during the current pandemic. So while this toolkit is ready to be deployed and tested in the field, we have several additional recommendations regarding validation that should be taken into consideration when preparing to analyze and interpret the data using these tools. So first, the definitions developed here identify which dimensions and questions should be used to measure social capital and social cohesion. The main limitation is that these definitions by themselves don't automatically suggest whether and how these individual survey questions should be combined into aggregate indices of social capital and social cohesion. So to do this, it'll be necessary to conduct construct validation using data collected with these tools to empirically test how these measures relate to one another. Second, as the survey tool is deployed in more and more contexts, cross-context validation should be conducted to assess how the performance of individual survey questions and any aggregate indices is similar or different across contexts. Finally, it is our hypothesis that the set of questions selected here validly measures social capital and social cohesion while maximizing ease of implementation for organizations implementing CLD approaches. However, this hypothesis should be empirically tested by comparing this toolkit against other indices and survey tools used in the literature to assess relative performance on both measurement, validity, and ease of use. I think I'm getting an unmuted microphone somewhere with some feedback. Thanks, I think it got addressed. So just to wrap up, as these validation needs indicate, the next step with this toolkit is to get it into the field and to start a cycle of learning and adaptation from validation analyses and user feedback. And of course, the big complication of all of this is that the COVID-19 pandemic is forcing us to very quickly rethink the approach for both programs and evaluations. While many activities are being postponed, the most common adaptation is using information and communication technology for mobile surveying and interviewing. So we wanted to briefly touch on a few ideas of what that might mean, and we're happy to dive into this more in the Q&A. First implication of responding to COVID is the need to rely on desk research, expert consultations, and remote interviewing for the qualitative inputs needed to adapt the survey. As Gian mentioned, even before COVID, this was on our radar. So we anticipated that this mode of qualitative information gathering might be necessary. So the approach outlined in the toolkit, that is the lighter touch qualitative approach, will directly be able to be used in surveys that are being put together now during COVID. A second and more of a heavy pivot is how to think about the questions in this toolkit in the context of conducting mobile phone surveys. And this was a big topic of conversation when we presented this work back to the World Bank earlier this month. And the biggest implication and decision point here is the mode of mobile phone survey that you're using. So our strong recommendation is, if you are doing a mobile phone survey, is to use it with computer-assisted telephone interviewing that has interviewers administering phone surveys, rather than some of the more interactive and automated approaches using voice response surveys or SMS. And so even though our aim was to make a toolkit that was as user-friendly and lightweight as possible, it's our expectation that the content and number of these questions still requires a live interviewer speaking with the respondent. And then a final implication of COVID for this toolkit is more on the side of the programs that we're using it to evaluate. And I think this really connects to what Nelly was mentioning at the beginning of the meeting, right? That the key components of CLD and the heart of the underlying theories of change really rely on bringing people together in groups and mobilizing people directly. And this is precisely what social distancing measures are preventing. In Mercy Corps' programs that have a community mobilization and the CLD component, we're starting to contemplate whether any components of these interventions can be carried forward using technology or other adaptations, or whether these programs need to be delayed until group gatherings and movement are allowed again. And I think this is especially on our minds, given some reports from our crisis analytics, which indicate that there are a number of ways that the pandemic and the public health response is shaping social capital and social cohesion, which indicates that there really is a need to think about how to adapt CLD and related programming approaches during and after the pandemic. And I'd be interested in hearing how your own organizations are adapting to this reality. And I think that this is just the real benefit of speaking to this community of practice and this community of advocacy in this moment. So thank you for your attention, and I look forward to discussing all of this more in any Q&A that we have.
That's great, Ryan. Thank you very much. People can ask questions through the chat or by unmuting and just asking a question. As Ryan said, actual human interaction is valuable here any way we can get it. So anyone have any questions they'd like to ask? Don't be shy. Well, I have a question. I notice you have photos that are all men and photos that are all women. Do you see this working best in mixed groups or separated groups, or what's the gender approach, do you think, to using this tool? And then the gentleman with his hand up can ask a question too. Unmute and ask your question. Okay, Robert, we're getting a lot of background noise. If you're not speaking, please mute your phone by hovering over the screen and clicking on the mic. So, Gian, or would one of you like to answer my question? Oh, and somebody else has asked the same question. So how do you intersect this toolkit with a gender lens?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Great. I think where the gender lens may be really fruitful and important to consider is in the qualitative contextualization process. So as we are identifying important subgroups whose insights, experiences, and perspectives should be reflected and used to contextualize a question, a women-only group can often be a really great way of ensuring that women themselves feel comfortable in discussing these issues that are important for evaluators to keep in mind. And as Ryan alluded to in his presentation, we also include some opportunities to gain some insights of the social dynamics that might be important, not only for the evaluation, but also for potentially the CLD project overall. As this is an evaluation tool, we don't provide any guidance on how CLD programs should be conducted, but nevertheless, these insights would be helpful for considering not only gender norms, but also issues that pertain to relevant social groups along ethnic lines, displacement status, et cetera. And so we have purposely built in the opportunity to do that during the qualitative exercise. Ryan, Carly, feel free to add or correct anything there.
No, I think that's great. Maybe one thing to add is that it is worth thinking, though, almost having, and we didn't get to, there are a lot of elements of, say, how you compose a evaluation team and a plan that are outside of the scope of the toolkit that kind of assumes you are planning on doing a survey and have a set of practices for doing that. But I think it is worth highlighting to bring a gender lens to say how you are kind of doing that initial qualitative contextualization and to how you're composing your enumerator teams and for sampling for a survey, right? So that I think it's very possible that even if there is a gender lens in your work, there are blind spots that can creep in. I think this is actually, John, you noticing the kind of single gender composition in the photos. These are pulled from Mercy Corps' large library, and it's one of those things where it's telling to actually see that there is kind of these approaches to solo groups there. And obviously it's tens and tens of thousands of photos, but I think that bringing that awareness and moment of reflection is a really kind of key point, even in moments that feel like more of the kind of infrastructural moments of doing a M&E or research exercise.
Great, Ryan, thanks. Dana Brown has a question. Do you assume a conflict or do no harm analysis has been done first or in tandem? And then she has two more questions. Can't local groups do the analysis and definitions themselves with the communities they work for? Who is doing the analysis? Who would like to take that one?
So I'll take a first step of that. I think it's a really interesting and exciting idea to do, and so as a taking a step back, a lot of the initial structure of the toolkit was driven by the World Bank's use case, and that has to do with both their particular approach to CDD and the types of evaluation, the scale and capacity of the teams that they're working with. And I think that an interesting back and forth is that I think Gian and and Carly all had, I think, instincts for even more participatory and open-ended qualitative work up front. And I think that in the spirit of this being a open and adaptable approach, I think it would be really interesting to work with like the having a kind of definition setting exercise up front. And I do think that it's really interesting to think about how this might evolve alongside that kind of approach. So I do imagine, and I think if there's like if there's interest in kind of a trajectory of this kind of work that is actually starts with a different approach to defining definitions locally first, it would be really fascinating to kind of track that process, because I think one of our aims here in having this be a learning community and living tool is to allow for as much adaptation and cross-pollination as possible. But then I think in the spirit of the meta-analysis, to then track and record and identify our adaptations so that we can start accumulating knowledge. And so I think that that kind of what was proposed, definitely Susan would have probably yelled at us from a practicality standpoint. But I think I, for one, actively encourage cases of kind of positive deviance and adaptation. On the question about how to sequence this with conflict analysis and or do no harm analysis, that was out of the scope of the ask. I think in my mind, I would say most cases where we would be using this at Mercy Corps would probably be after having done a do no harm analysis. But there isn't a prescribed sequence there. Gian or Carly, any other responses on this note of questions?
Great.
No, Ryan, I think just for sake of time, we can move on. Just to iterate that, I think we were trying to strike a balance of making sure that this was standardized in the sense that we're bringing precision to the measurement and evaluation of these topics, but generalizable enough that we weren't prescribing exactly in what sequence, in what order evaluation steps need to happen for a variety of programs. So I think a lot of things will be left up to the team to ensure that it is appropriate and feasible given resource and capacity constraints.
Okay, well, I think there have been a lot of questions. Some of you have been seeing the answers posted on the chat. Just to let everyone know, this has been recorded. It will appear on our website after this call, and there also everyone who has subscribed to our email list will get an announcement about how to access it. There are a lot of questions about training, and Gunjan has announced we're looking at having another session on using this. I think people were curious, Mercy Corps, whether you all would come and do trainings for different groups. I don't know if that's in your plan or budget, but certainly as the movement, we're going to facilitate people learning how to adapt and use this in different contexts. So with that, I really want to thank you. If there are more questions, we can handle them offline in follow-up conversations or emails. Gunjan, I'm going to switch now to sharing my screen if I can. And it would be great for you to introduce Britt. And she has another toolkit to announce here. So, and then we'll.
Thanks, John. And yeah, if people have these questions, we'll kind of make sure that they go to the Mercy Corps team. I think Gian is already looking at them, so that conversation can continue. But very excited to introduce Britt Lake, who is the CEO of Feedback Labs. A lot of you may remember her from the October 2 event that we organized in DC, where Britt moderated the session on feedback and responsiveness on community-led development. So we started today's meeting talking about, the April 21st meeting and some of the problems and issues that were coming up that partners were facing. And one thing that came up constantly was in the times of social distancing, in the times of, or rather we decided to not call it social distancing, but physical distancing. So in the times of physical distancing and travel bans and all the other connectivity issues that we have, how do we continue to listen to our communities? And more importantly, how do we continue to carry these voices to donors and other platforms? And so I'm very happy that we actually have Britt with us here today because they have come up with some resources that they would like to share with us. So Britt, over to you, and John's going to run the slides. So just let us know when you want the slides to change.
Great, and you can tell how long that we've been stuck indoors because my hair has grown a lot since that last slide, that last picture was taken. Thank you so much for that introduction. For those who are unfamiliar, Feedback Labs is a network of hundreds of representatives from nonprofits, foundations, aid agencies, local governments that believe that people should have a say in the policies and programs that affect their lives. So I think something that is probably near and dear to all of your hearts as well. While, over the last few weeks and now months, we've been getting a lot of questions from our network asking how they should adapt their feedback and listening practice during this time of physical distancing, and while new concerns continue to crop up that maybe is different from what people are normally used to working on. And as a result of the feedback we've gotten that that's a need of our community, we've developed a few resources, and I only have a few minutes, so I'll quickly go over them now. If you could move to the next slide. So the first is we've developed some pieces of evidence in making the case for those of you who need to convince funders or bosses or others around you why listening is essential right now. For most of you, this is probably me preaching to the choir here. But I think as we have seen in any major emergency, humanitarian or natural disaster, it's especially important to listen to community needs and adapt based on that, simply because adaptation needs to happen so rapidly, and the stakes are so high. So I'm not going to go over all of these, but a few things that I will mention. One is that at least here in the U.S., I think we're seeing an increased interest from funders to have an element of listening and feedback in your COVID-19 response. And one piece of evidence around that is that the Council on Foundations has a giving pledge that now over 700 funders have signed. One of the main commitments in that is a commitment to listening and acting on feedback. So that, in addition to all of the regular reasons why because listening helps you better target your interventions, it helps save time and money, builds trust and ensures inclusivity, all sort of help to build the case that listening is an essential element that is worth investing funding and resources in. Next slide, please. So this is just a link, and I can put it in the chat as well. On our website, we've developed a quick resource page, and this will continue to be built out through the coming weeks, but it essentially has 3 pieces of resources for those of you who are interested in improving your feedback practice right now or adapting it to the times we're living in. The first is that sort of making the case element. We have some pieces of supporting evidence that'll help you make the case that the investment in time and finances is worth this. Next, we have 7 tips that are specifically curated to help you understand how to adapt your feedback practice and your listening during this time. Those 7 tips were curated from our greater Feedback Labs community of people who are already doing this really well, and I think there's some great examples there. And then finally, we have specific tools that we would recommend that would help you carry out some of these. So there are a variety of tools that will help you sort of be able to collect and listen to, listen to your community and act on that feedback. The last thing I'll mention, and I'll put this link in the chat as well, is that on May 6th at 2 p.m. Eastern, we'll be hosting a free webinar that makes the case for feedback and uses a series of examples specific to COVID-19 that might be useful for any of you to attend, or anyone in your network that you still are sort of wanting to bring on board in the work that we're all doing around this area. So again, I'll put that in the chat. I know, again, I only have a few minutes here, but just want to let Feedback Labs be a resource for all of you. If there are tools or challenges that you are seeking, please reach out to us, because we really are here to support the field, and we want to make sure that the tools and the resources that we're providing are useful to all of you. So I'll also leave my email address in the chat, and I'll pass it on. Thank you for those few minutes to be able to share those resources and links.
Oh, thank you, Britt. It's great seeing you again, and thank you for all this. It looks very useful. Okay, we're now going to jump out in the world and hear what's been happening in the national chapters around the world. I'd like to start with Mexico. Would someone like to update us on how the movement in Mexico is working during this year?
Yes, thank you, John. This is Diana. Hello to everyone.
Hi, Diana.
In Mexico, we've been doing home office here, and my boyfriend, so he's always talking. Sorry. So in Mexico, we've been working in 4 dimensions. The first one is the prevention and information about COVID-19 to our community partners, and then we're doing GFCLD. We're doing GFCLD and mobilizing GFCLD, and also we're working in our strategy. In the first one, with the prevention and information of COVID-19, what we're doing is working in alliance with another organization from the movement for developing material in local languages for the general population and for the appropriation in appropriate means. I mean, community radios, speakers in streets or in public places. And besides, this is a way to leverage a self-reliant response, since our community partners are sharing this information and infographics with local health authorities and with local municipal authorities. That's something that has been really important since at the very beginning of the crisis of these times. The response of local authorities was kind of weak. And also we've been trying to be we've been trying as the national office to our community partners to be a reliable source of information, so they cannot, so people are not sharing like fake news or something. So we're trying to give them information and to help them to find official information for really knowing what's going on. And about doing GFCLD, what we're making is the companion of our community partners in Chiapas, where the women from cooperatives are making decisions for the welfare of their members and the clients. and they also developing new ways to make decisions with physical distance. And this is something that it's an exercise for increasing the socioeconomic and political empowerment. About mobilizing GFCLD, what we're doing is that we launch a call for implementing 8 urgent actions, such as developing materials in local languages and particular measures for preventing violence against women during physical isolation, particularly with a special focus in rural and indigenous communities. And this call now has the support of 48 civil societies, including the movement organizations, and 43 active citizens. And what we want to do is a follow-up of these actions and to increase the support in this urgent call. And this is going to be a document or something that we share with federal and local governments and also with international organizations. And we're also working with different platforms with a lot of organizations with the movement and the movement with other networks. So we want to identify undesirable outcomes from government measures. For example, if they're doing money transfers, that's causing crowds on ATMs, and that's a risk space. So we want to identify this for having an advocacy platform for changing this in a very rapid way for diminishing that risk for population, but also to understand what public policies needs to be built, not only in crisis, but later on. And finally, and finally, what we want to do is, what we're trying to do is a multi-stakeholder dialogue with United Nations and here in Mexico with Inter-America Development Bank for building responses from after the crisis, not only during the crisis of COVID-19, but what's going on later on. And sorry for the time. Thank you, John.
Oh, thank you, Deanna. So let's swing across the Atlantic, and we have a lot of folks from the newly birthing MCLD chapter in Nigeria who'd like to tell us about the emergence of this new chapter. Rebecca, is that you? You have to unmute. You're still muted. You have to hover over your mouse and click on your little microphone to have it change from red to green. Or someone else from Nigeria can unmute their mic and tell us what's happening. There you are, Rebecca.
Yes. Okay. We started with a meeting. Pascal coordinated that meeting, and he explained to us how to form the chapter, and we were very excited, and how we can organize ourselves, and how we have to come together, and our aim should be one that will help the community. We have to be trustworthy, and we have to work along with people that is going to move the community forward. And you know, I heard about this movement from Gujam when we met in the US ID co-creation workshop. So she was telling me, and I said, okay, this group will be good in Nigeria. And also, Anne invited me for West African talk. So when I heard all over that people in Africa are doing this, but Nigeria did not have this group. And then I asked Anne, I said, can you allow me to form this group? And she said, yes, why not? So she sent it to me. And I invited the organization, the people that I know, the organization that they are trying locally to organize, and some they have some sponsors, but even without sponsors, some are really trying to help people. So I gather about 11 organizations, and in the when Pascal shared with us that, and then when we read that this group should involve like a company and all this, so I invited some few companies that will join. So now I set a meeting on Monday. We are going to meet, and we are going to follow the guideline which Pascal shared with us, and then Anne, and then you send us some very important things. And also, I asked the non-profit to key into that, to see your, to go to the website and look at all the things that some other people are doing. So we will meet, and then we will discuss on Monday 4th before we will invite Anne and Pascal again, so that we will share with him what we are doing. Now it's just a drop of few non-profits and companies that I know, but you know, Nigeria, we have over 2 million people, and we have thousands of non-profit and companies, but we will start small and then expand and advocate, so that some of the non-profit and then the companies can join, and even the government agencies can join. So
Wonderful.
I have numerous people here who are capable.
Yes,
I can see
we see them.
Professor Yang and Dr. Yossi,
Yep.
and some people that are here. So, and Barrister Kuchali Maspalma and all this. So we have moved ahead and do a lot of things. So if they can at least talk, it's going to be good.
Well,
but I generally
we have time to hear from
honored.
everyone this morning, Rebecca, but it's very exciting what you're doing, and looking forward to hear what comes out of Monday's meeting. And I know that Anne and Pascal will support you in getting things organized. But just thank you for bringing everyone to this call, and it's great to see everyone. And we're going to have to move on to the other parts of the world here.
Okay.
I so look forward to getting back to Nigeria myself. I just had a wonderful, wonderful visit there with Anne last year, and look forward to meeting you all in person. Okay, let me move to any other West African country. I know Senegal was here and then had to leave. I don't know if
Yes,
Ghana.
John.
Hi, Pascal.
Is there. Yeah. Yes, John, thank you. I'm sorry that I appear here as Global THP. Last time I used the platform for the meetings, but I could not manage to put Pascal here, but I hope that you help me to set this.
Yeah, that's
and
fine.
One thing I would like to mention about the call with Nigeria is that we start now every course with chapters, every meeting online with brainstorming about COVID-19. And that's what we did also with Nigeria. And that would be good that Rebecca and all partners who were in that meeting build on this, so that we continue grasping ideas from grassroots people to build our strategy on COVID-19. About Benin specifically, one thing I would mention is we come with all information available and broadcast by the government, and we make sure that youth and women involved in our chapter make available those information at the grassroots level. That is one. But one thing at the chapter level, the main question is how do we build the resilience of the community? That is the most important question. And what we have done so far is to make sure that we make available at the community level the mask at a very low cost, affordable, and replicable at the community level. We assess the cost. It is about $0.1, the cost. I have one here. This is one I can show. We have just, sorry. Yeah, can you hear? Yeah, this is one. Yeah, this is one.
Oh, there you are. Hey,
Yeah.
the map man. Wow, that's a big one.
Yes, we have just built it. We have many examples here. And then this is one we are distributing at the community level. We don't have the report, but we can have report by the end of this week how many of this has been made available at the community level. And
Great.
one thing again, we are talking about nutrition at the community level to make sure that one thing here in our communities, vegetable and fruits are available, but people don't use them, they don't consume them. What we are doing now by this time is to raise awareness on the profits they will get by consuming vegetable and fruits, and help by this time to have home garden as well to grow vegetable and to support this. We have many other action in that line, but I could report on this later on. Thank you, John.
Okay, thank you so much, Pascal, our regional coordinator. Dr. Daisy, are you there? Can you tell us about East Africa?
Isaac is also here for West Africa.
Who is? Oh, Isaac. Please go ahead,
Yes.
Isaac.
Thank you, Dr. Conrad. In Ghana, the CLD movement works through the INGO, the International NGO platform.
Right.
We met at that level to discuss extensively our response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And in that meeting, we adopted a number of response strategies, which include using digital and electronic approaches to educating our communities on the disease, to build their capacity to be able to prevent and to deal with the coronavirus. We have also discussed the need to provide the needed logistics and PPEs, personal protection equipment, especially to the rural clinics. The rural clinics have been more or less, they seem not to be the government's priority. The priority for the distribution of PPEs is on the city clinics, to the neglect of the rural clinics. So our focus is to provide this equipment to the rural clinics. Hunger Project has gone ahead to procure some PPEs for distribution to our epicenter clinics. We have also procured some of these logistics for distribution to our animators.
Yes.
in the communities, and we have also impressed upon other members of the movement to do same, to protect volunteers that they are working with and the partners. So we are also using radio, mobile phones, as I said, digital and electronic means to carry out this education in the communities. So these are some of the key things that we are doing in response to COVID.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Daisy, over to you, if you can unmute. You're muted, Daisy. Now you're not. Yes, good.
Okay. Yes, good evening, everybody. Yes, I'm from Uganda. So we have the movement for community development in Uganda. And we have also tried to do our part in responding to the COVID epidemic. But if I may give just a background, sometime back we had already started working with the government of Uganda in terms of how they can take the community-led development approach to scale during our national development plan development for 2020, so 2025. So we have had some relationship with the government. We had established some relationship with the government. So now with the COVID pandemic, it became very serious. It's a national issue, and it requires more than ever the community-led development approach. So we are seeing ourselves coming in handy in this time of the pandemic. First, we have a common information sharing platform, maybe like how all the other groups are. But in this case, the members now are sharing what they are doing towards the pandemic, what they are involved in, and this is providing opportunities for cross-learning, adopting good practices, and also, again, entrenching the community-led development practices. This came in hand in the sense that the expertise in community mobilization and sensitization is very critical in the rapid dissemination of accurate information and also guidance. So the community-led development chapter members have engaged in information and awareness creation campaigns at the community level, and we are covering almost all districts because we are in every area, and we are also in most of the sector areas. We are working closely with the government at the district level. Some of the chapter members are part of the epicenter of the district or local government task forces to ensure that the standard operation procedures are followed.
Right.
But also at the national level, we are working through the Uganda National NGO Forum, which is spearheading the collaborative efforts between the civil society and also the Office of the Prime Minister. This is offering us a lot of visibility. And most importantly, all our members, including the Hunger Project, are part of the civil society members who are organizing and mobilizing the most vulnerable people in communities to register and also benefit from the ongoing government relief program. Apart from that, some of our members are actually involved in relief, providing some of the essentials for distressed communities or households. Some are providing food, some are providing other amenities like mattresses, and also mostly are engaged in training the village health teams on how to carry out door-to-door sensitization and the messages that go with that. And of course, we are also providing, where possible, some of the protective gear and other sanitation materials to the community members. There are some key organizations which have sort of stood out in our members, in our membership. Some like World Vision, our member donated, took the time to launch an over 1 million emergency response support, which was much appreciated by the government.
Yeah.
And it is going to go to about 53 districts. We have one link, the Mengo Youth Development Link, which is supporting a lot, almost all the street children in Kampala, giving them a tentative shelter and also food.
Wow.
We have also an initiative in Maracha where we operate some organizations which are providing cash food and also the PPE materials. So I would say most of the members are participating in information, in also support where they can, and also working hand in government with the government.
Wonderful.
And maybe lastly, but just 1 minute, one important aspect is that the Hunger Project wrote an article, one of our members, on gender and human rights perspective on community-led response to COVID, which was really seen as very critical in reaching a lot of members and also beyond the chapter members, as it appeared online and also in most of the daily, the popular dailies in Uganda. So I can say we are also heavily involved in the responding to the pandemic, and I think we are doing a good job.
Good, Daisy. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, last but definitely not least, Southern Africa. Roland, do you want to update us?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, John. Let me start with, so in the Southern Africa, we've got 2 chapters, national chapters, one in Malawi and one in Zambia. These 2 chapters have been concentrating mainly at 2 levels. The first level is community-led actions, which you've heard a lot from Daisy, Pascal, and my colleague from Mexico. And then the other level is to mobilize members for to make sure that CLD membership speaks with one voice. And on that one, let me specifically speak about Zambia, report on behalf of Zambia. It all started from a question from one powerful member, Ray, from Zambia, and who was asking at, okay, so how do we play our role as CLD members at national level? And then members stepped up that conversation and used the platform to come together. There was a call that came out of that conversation, at first it was aimed for Zambia, but it actually grew to the region, and then it actually became a global call organized by Zambia chapter, where most of the members participated from all over the world, and they came up with very clear steps. One important step that they came up with actually was to make sure that Zambia should speak with one voice as CLD members, and they have created a civil society task force. A civil society task force is called COVID Response Task Force for the CLD members, and that has harmonized the energy for CLD members in Zambia, and it's great to see even like from the Office of Chiefs and all that represented on that particular platform. So it's really a big achievement that the chapter has had in Zambia, and the numbers of membership has continued to grow in Zambia. At community level, different members in Malawi as well as in Zambia, member organizations on the CLD national chapters have embarked on making sure that they reach out to every community member in the areas that they are working in, providing information, promoting hygiene behavior, and then correcting information that is not correct, as reported by Mexico, issues of using no person-to-person interaction, physical
Right.
interaction means of information communication, radios, megaphones, and all that. Others in Malawi have even supported establishment of TB-taps. It has a different name here in Malawi. It's called Impondagia. It's a local name. And different committees are members are involved in the civil, like district civil committees that are existing in the two countries. And from the Hunger Project, we have also seen the community food banks as well as the microfinance rural banks actually being operational during this time to make sure that they support the livelihoods of the communities that are supported in the epicenters where the Hunger Project is currently implementing. And if some members in the national chapter of Malawi CLD, they belong to the INGO forum in Malawi, which actually meets regularly and it interfaces with the cabinet committee on COVID, and which of course yesterday it has been renamed presidential committee or presidential task force, and now it is going to include membership from the civil society, which is a great improvement to see in the composition of that particular national response steering committee. In brief, that's about what has been going on in the Malawi chapter and in the Zambia chapter. Thank you.
Wonderful, Rollins. Thank you. Well, it's amazing. We've actually made it on time. Anne has pointed out in the chat that there's a document on our COVID page that you can download also, that on civil society response. And as she says, has been co-created by all the chapters. So please see that. Our next meeting, global meeting, will be exactly a month from now, Wednesday, May 27th, at the same time. Please, if you are generating photos of your activities on COVID-19, it would be great to see them. It would be great to share them on our website and in our call next time. And I know that a lot of the chapters will be having remote calls together and lots of interfaces through Zoom and other ways with lots of other organizations to push this agenda and empower community leaders to make their communities resilient to COVID-19. This will give us enormous lessons learned for the future of community-led development in all sectors. I want to thank all of you for your patience, your commitment, your drive, your ability to outreach against all odds. And I look forward to creating this new world with you. So thank you all, and goodbye until next time. You can unmute and say goodbye if you like.
Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye. Nice seeing
Goodbye.
you. Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Yes. Oh. Thank you, Dr. John Conrad. This is Jude from Liberia. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Hello? Hello? Okay.